Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to this evening's lecture, which forms part of the series Museen am ZI. We are delighted to welcome Femke Speelberg as our speaker tonight. Femke Speelberg is curator of historic ornament, design, and architecture in the Department of Drawings and Prints at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. She has been at the Met since 2011, first as assistant curator, then as associate curator, and since 2022 as curator. Her work is situated in a particularly rich field at the intersection of drawing, ornament, architecture, and the applied arts. At the Metropolitan Museum, she oversees drawings, prints, and illustrated books related to the history of design and architecture, ranging from the Gothic period to the first half of the 20th century. In doing so, she engages with a body of material that is central to art history, yet often difficult to define precisely. Works on paper as media of invention, transmission, repetition, and artistic circulation. Femke Speelberg's research repeatedly returns to the question of how forms come into being, how they travel, and how they are translated across different media and workshop contexts. Her work on ornament prints, pattern books, design drawings, and architectural fantasies demonstrates with great clarity that drawings and prints are not merely preparatory of reproductive media. Rather, they are sites of artistic thought, places where designs are developed, varied, disseminated, and reinterpreted. This perspective also shapes her curatorial work. Among her exhibitions at the Metropolitan Museum are projects devoted to Renaissance textile pattern books, to Thomas Chippendale, and to drawings for architecture and the decorative arts, just to name a few. Most recently, she has been working on the major exhibition Gothic by Design, The Dawn of Architectural Draftsmanship, which explores the emergence and significance of Gothic architectural drawing. And now there's a short advert break, I would say. This is the exhibition catalog of the current exhibition, which runs until July 19th. So you can consult it in our ZE library. Her recent publication on late Gothic architectural draftsmanship on Lorenz Lechler and on Wenzel von Olmütz, likewise show how consistently she brings together questions of authorship, workshop practice, medial transfer, and artistic mobility. Against this background, it is especially fitting that tonight's lecture is devoted to the so-called Basler Goldschmiederisse. Its title, you see it, What's in a Name? The Basler Goldschmiederisse and the Quest for Their Artistic Origins, makes clear that we are not simply dealing with a single group of works, but with a fundamental art historical question. What does a name reveal, and what might it obscure? How can artistic origin, function, and authorship be reconstructed when objects are defined precisely by their movement across media, materials, and disciplines? In her lecture, Femke Speelberg will approach these questions as a kind of art historical investigation. I very much look forward to tonight's lecture and to hearing from a scholar whose work so compellingly shows us fruitful it can be to bring the seeming margins of art history, ornament, pattern, design, and workshop material into the center of our attention. Please join me in welcoming Femke Speelberg.
Thank you, Katja, for introducing me. Thank you for having me here today to speak. Also, thank you for everyone coming in this very hot weather. I hope the subject matter will be compelling enough to make it worth your while. So without further ado, I will begin. Here we go. So currently on view at the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York is the exhibition Gothic by Design, The Dawn of Architectural Draftsmanship. The exhibition offers an overview of the relatively unknown yet flourishing tradition of architectural drawing that manifested in Western and Central Europe at least from the 12th century onwards. Today, this tradition is still documented by roughly 600 to 800 examples, which appear to form the tip of an iceberg of the many thousands of drawings that must have been produced during the roughly 400 years that mark the Gothic style period in Western architecture. They represent an array of different types of drawings, from small sketches and manifold entries in personal albums to large-scale floor plans and elevations for presentation and detailed working drawings that informed distinct campaigns during the actual building process. The greater majority of these drawings were originally archived by the Bauhütte, the building lodges or architectural workshops that were directly affiliated with Gothic cathedrals and churches, and later subsumed into church and municipal archives, historical museums, libraries, and art academies. Only a relative few found their way into collections of fine arts museums. And as a result, over the past 2 centuries, Gothic architecture drawings have principally been studied by architectural historians with an interest in the design and building history of specific Gothic buildings, but they have hardly been included in other investigations focused on the graphic arts of the Middle Ages. One of the principal aims of our exhibition is to make these incredible historical records of Gothic ingenuity known to a wider and more diverse audience, and by doing so to encourage further research into this material, as well as its implications for our general understanding of draftsmanship and design practices before the advent of the Renaissance, the period that is generally pinpointed by traditional art history as the time and place of the birth, or rather rebirth, of the ingenious architect, as well as the emergence of an increasingly sophisticated approach to architectural design and draftsmanship. By necessity, therefore, the exhibition and accompanying catalog function as an introduction and general overview of the subject and objects on display. It goes without saying that many warrant longer and much deeper discussion and investigation to answer the many research questions they invoke. It is an absolute pleasure that this lecture and this conference allows us to do just that. And I will say that this is the beginning of a research project, and we are about to embark on a 3-day conference dedicated specifically to the topic of this lecture. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to come out the other end with totally new ideas and insights. So don't blame me for what we are yet to discover, but I hope you will still enjoy this introduction. In particular, I will focus on a group of drawings known as the Basler Goldschmiederisse, a pivotal collection of drawings whose greater significance has long been overlooked, in part because of the seemingly self-explanatory nature of their name. Due to their designation as Goldschmiederisse, or goldsmith drawings, they were automatically parked in a very specific corner of art history, while their wider implications and possible origins have remained understudied. That things are not always what they seem is evident when we consider the drawings on the screen. They are part of a booklet of leaf designs from the collection of the Bayerisches Nationalmuseum here in Munich, and currently on loan to our exhibition in New York. At first glance, however, you might wonder why they would be included in an exhibition dedicated to Gothic architecture at all. And you might sooner associate these drawings with the 15th century engravings of leaf motifs made by leading German printmakers such as the Master E.S. and Martin Schongauer, an example of which is visible on the right. This association is not entirely wrong, but the drawings predate the engravings by at least several decades and may, as predecessors, instead have served as the initial inspiration for their younger cousins in print. In actuality, the booklet constitutes a so-called Laubhauer-Musterbuch, or leafcutter's model book. This means that the elegant leaves motifs were meant to be carved out of stone by a master mason who had enjoyed advanced training in this specialized craft. More precisely, it belonged to one Hans Böblinger, now known today as Hans Böblinger the Elder, patriarch of 3 generations of Gothic architects, who was chiefly associated with the Frauenkirche in Esslingen near Stuttgart. When he made this booklet, however, Böblinger would have been about 22 years old, and he had only just completed, or was in the process of completing, his education to become a master mason. How do we know this? Because Böblinger told us so. He inscribed the first page with the text, Ich, Hans von Böblinger in Steinmetz, I, Hans von Böblingen, a stonemason, accompanied by the year 1435 and his personal mason's mark. Based on this information, Peter Völkel has more recently been able to reconstruct the precise context in which Böblinger made the drawings. The identification of Böblinger's mark on several carved elements for the minster in the Swiss town of Bern suggests that Böblinger worked there as a journeyman for a period of about 6 to 8 weeks in 1435. His time there overlapped with a campaign for carving naturalistic leafwork on the capitals that adorn the choir. He seems to have taken full advantage of the opportunity to study this process closely, and it is possible that he came to Bern to do just that. The technical progression of his leaf drawing suggests that the freehand motifs were entirely new to him when he began, but that he quickly gained his dexterity, learning to follow the curling shapes of the leaves and to adapt hatching and shading techniques suggestive of depth and movement. Of the 31 drawings in his booklet, 7 are direct copies after carved motifs found in Bern Minster, while 6 others are closely related. The rest are variants that taught Böblinger how to design such decorations independently and how to adjust a design to fit a specific application. While not indicated as such in this booklet, Robert Bork rightfully argued that the placement of these motifs and other ornaments often followed the same rules of geometry and proportion as the architecture they adorn. This can be seen, for example, in this drawing from the Bauhüttebuch or Lodgebook of Hans Hamme on the right, in which the architect shows how to determine the correct placement and proportions of the leaf-shaped crockets of a pinnacle. Had Böblinger not inscribed his booklet, the lack of technical drawings of this kind would have undoubtedly meant that his drawings would have sooner been categorized as the work of a sculptor rather than a master mason in training. And for comparison, I show here a print by the sculptor Veit Stoß that may have formed a persuasive argument in favor of this classification. If anything, this example shows us that contextual evidence, or the lack thereof, can significantly hinder our understanding of works of art. This may also be the case with the Basler Goldschmiederisse, which sadly carry no inscriptions, or other marks that may easily betray their identity, the identity of their maker. Before we enter into the realm of speculation concerning this matter, however, let me briefly summarize what we do know. In 1578, Basilius Amerbach, son of the Basel law professor Bonifatius Amerbach, acquired the entire workshop inventory of the Schweiger dynasty of goldsmiths, an acquisition that expanded upon his father's interest in Kunstkammer artifacts. Above all, the acquisition demonstrated that Basilius was not only interested in the finished work of art, but in the process of their making. The acquisition entailed drawings and prints that served as inspiration for designs, cast and models in a variety of metals and at various stages in their production cycles, and all the tools that were used in the process of making. Sadly, likely due to differing attitudes towards this material in later times, much of this contextual material has since been lost. None of the tools have been preserved, and about 500 of the workshop models in metal and 400 works on paper, identified as both prints and drawings, appear to have disappeared or are no longer identifiable as part of the inventory. This may have been caused by the repeated rearrangement or rehousing of the collection. While in 1662, the collection of drawings was described as 541 Goldschmiederisse samt ein Buch von Rissen, 541 drawings in one album. By the 19th century, the drawings were distributed across 3 albums organized by their diverging context, which in turn were taken apart in the early 20th century. The loss of the printed material in particular may be regretted, as currently there are no prints at all that can be securely connected to the estate, even if certain educated guesses can be made. And I'm showing here 2 examples of prints that were included in the 1999 exhibition and accompanying catalog dedicated to the illustrious Amerbach Cabinet. On the left, we see Martin Schongauer's famous censer, and on the right, a design for a crozier, here in 2 parts, by the goldsmith and printmaker Israel von Meckenham. The collection would more than likely also have included Albrecht Altdorfer's rich series of globular vessels, which appear to have functioned as a point of departure for numerous designs in a very similar vocabulary. The surviving 331 drawings can similarly be divided into those that were made in the Schweiger workshop and others that were collected by the Schweiger workshop, either out of sheer interest or through gifts and exchanges among their cultural and artistic network, which appears to have been extensive, or as inspirational material for their own production. In most cases, the materials and techniques of the drawings themselves help us sort out this disparate, though not always mutually exclusive, function. By and large, all the drawings that are executed in black chalk can be credited with some certainty to the Schweiger workshop itself, and were made during their years of activity in Basel. The workshop there was established by Jörg Schweiger, who moved to Basel around 1507 when he became a guild member, and he was granted citizenship in the town in the following year. His sons, Hans and Urs Schweiger, continued the workshop after their father's passing in 1534 until the 1570s, by which time both brothers have passed away. After this moment, it is Hans Schweiger's son-in-law who makes the decision to sell the entire workshop to Basilius Amerbach. Another group of drawings, executed instead in pen and ink in a strikingly uniform manner, tells us that Jörg Schweiger did not arrive in Basel empty-handed. The stylistic character of the designs speaks to a German provenance and seems rooted in a vocabulary that predates Schweiger's time in Basel. They were, it seems, created at some point during Schweiger's training or early career as a goldsmith in Germany, and it is therefore highly unlikely that the drawings reflect designs of his own creation. Not only does the variety of designs suggest the work of a broadly trained, well-seasoned artist, or possibly even a multifaceted, multi-generational workshop, but the character of the drawings themselves is not that of original designs. This becomes glaringly obvious when we confront two discrete plans from among the Basler Goldschmiederisse with their apparent model. Now found in the British Museum in London, where it belongs to a 16th century album containing drawings by and after Albrecht Dürer. It also includes several that are falsely attributed to Nuremberg artists, of which this drawing appears to be an example. See here the false monogram. Rather than solve our attribution problems, this connection only compounds them. For one, a comparison between the London and Basel sheets suggests that there may be more than one degree of separation between one and the other. As far as we can tell, for example, Schweiger never understood that these plans were connected and part of the same structure, which may represent an architectural design with a canopy consisting of three discrete baldachin structures. And what that may have been exactly is not entirely clear, but the association of the tripartite structure with Dürer brought to mind the possibility of a Gothic predecessor to Maximilian's Arch of Honor. To be absolutely clear, however, the London sheet nor our Basel drawings has anything to do with Albrecht Dürer. But it clearly shows that Schweiger's pen and ink drawings are based on an intermediary corpus of drawings whose ambitions greatly exceeded the field of goldsmith work alone. In 1864, in an article devoted to these drawings, the Swiss art historian Jacob Burckhardt characterized their nature as follows. Die gotische Sache bilde eine Gruppe für sich, gemäß dem Lebensprinzip aller Dekorationen dieses Stiles, sämtliche Gegenstände zu architektonisieren. Die bauliche Einzelformen werden dabei geistreich und prachtvoll umgebildet, durchsichtig gemacht und multipliziert. Nun sind unsere Zeichnungen vorzüglich so wichtig, weil sie uns in die Werkstatt der Erfindung hineinzuschauen gestatten und den eigentlichen Nerv derselbe anschaulich bloßlegen. Zunächst enthalten sie nicht bloß Goldschmiedesachen, sondern auch höchst geniale und reiche Entwürfe zu Arbeiten in den beiden anderen Hauptstoffen der spätgotischen Dekoration, nämlich Holz und Stein. Goldschmied, Holzschnitzer und Steinmetz begegnen sich hier in einer Person, oder sie offenbaren hier Abhängigkeit von einem großen Erfinder. In short, the Gothic drawings contain the fundamental building blocks that could be employed to architecturize all objects. They systematically inventory permutations related to nearly all the most prominent decorative elements in German late Gothic architecture and offer us insight into the very laboratory of Gothic invention. They do not simply pertain to goldsmith work, but also to two other main materials of late Gothic decoration, namely wood and stone. Here, goldsmith, carver, and stonemason are one and the same person, or depend on the work of one ingenious designer. Despite Burckhardt's apt evaluation of the drawings as laying bare the germ of Gothic invention, made by someone who seems to come close to the description of a homo universalis, a universal artist and thinker, few subsequent art historians have taken it upon themselves to delve further into their origins or question the identity of their maker. In spite of, or perhaps because of their somewhat unmoored status, the drawings have, in reverse, been used at least a number of times to expand upon or anchor the oeuvres of several other artists who were active in the late 15th century German context. In this capacity, a number of connections with existing artworks have been observed, which may ultimately help bring us a few steps closer to a possible answer. One very clear connection exists between this drawing of a baptismal font with its floor plan and the realized structure designed and created in 1477 by the architect Matthäus Böblinger for the Church of St. Martin in Langenau, a small town located just north of the city of Ulm. The structure is also known through a near-contemporary engraving printed from two small plates by the sculptor Jörg Zerling the Younger. As you can tell, the drawing and the print are closely akin, and it is highly likely that both derive from a since-lost drawing or pair of drawings by or after the master mason, rather than depend directly on observation in Langenau. In her work on the architect Lorenz Lechler, Anneliese Seeliger-Zeiss has further drawn attention to this idealized geometric plan that reflects the highly complex open-work base, here in detail, of Lechler's Sacrament House for the Church of St. Dionysius in Esslingen, executed there by the young, ambitious architect between 1486 and 1489. Furthermore, in his monographic study of the work of the international star architect Burckhardt Engelberg, Franz Bischoff pointed out that at least the upper part of this epitaph or niche is closely akin to the architectural vocabulary as practiced in Augsburg between the 1480s and beginning of the 16th century. These three comparisons clearly shift our attention away from the realm of Goldsmith's work to the sculptural and architectural works in stone. They were created over the course of roughly 3 decades across a geographic area of just under 160 kilometers. Such distances were by no means insurmountable at this time, as architects and other artists traveled with a certain frequency for work and leisure. We know, for instance, that around this very time, the Strasbourg stonemason Hans Hamme spent a decade-long traveling throughout Central Europe as a journeyman, visiting and working at cathedral building sites, including the Minster in Ulm, the Stephansdom in Vienna, and the Weizdom in Prague. Similarly, we know that Burckhardt Engelberg was involved in the design and execution of a broad array of ecclesiastical and secular buildings across a vast geographic area in Central Europe, from as far north as Heilbronn in the Neckar Valley to Konstanz and Bern in the southwest and Bolzano in the southeast. Rather than suppose that our drawings were made as part of a similar peregrination by an artist or artists who moved from site to site over a period of time, recording the work of peers and in drawings along the way, the three objects represented in our drawings and the biographies of the artist suggest a central point of conversion: the free imperial city of Ulm. Up until the 17th century, Ulm was one of the leading cities in the German-speaking lands, and as such, in the 14th century, the city initiated the construction of a new monumental minster. It became one of the most important building sites of the late Middle Ages that employed some of the most illustrious architects of the late Gothic period and recognized its own architectural significance from early on. In the 15th century, the building lodge even instituted a kind of intellectual property law by stipulating in the contracts of its lead architect that all designs pertaining to the Minster Church were to remain property of the lodge and were not to be taken elsewhere or used for other purposes. This is undoubtedly one of the reasons why today, together with Strasbourg and Vienna, Ulm is one of the 3 main archives of architectural drawings to have survived from the Gothic period. And here, for example, we see just 2 of the numerous stupendous elevations that record different iterations for the design of the monumental West Tower of the Ulm Minster. Matthäus Böblinger became Dombaumeister, or Master of Works of Ulm, in 1477. The same year, he made the baptismal font for the town of Langenau. Anneliese Seeliger-Zeiss has furthermore suggested that Lorenz Lechler was Böblinger's student at this very time, likely working along him as a master mason in training, first in Esslingen and later in Ulm, before venturing out on his own as a fully fledged architect. Following her reasoning, the drawings in Basel give us some insight into the form permutations that allowed Lechler to develop his complex geometric tabernacle base from Böblinger's initial font design. Böblinger remained at the head of the Ulm-Minster workshop for 15 years until 1492, when dislodged stones came crashing through the vault of the Minster Tower, an incident that ultimately led to Böblinger's dismissal. The following year, in 1493, none other than the Augsburg architect Burckhardt Engelberg took over his position as Dombaumeister in Ulm. The drawing in Basel that Franz Bischof connected to Engelberg seems to reflect the meaning of the stylistic vocabularies between the two artistic centers. Given these strong Ulm connections, one might expect to find the source material for the Basler Goldschmiederisse in the surviving drawing archive of the Minster Building Lodge. Had this been the case, however, their mystery would have been solved long ago. There is at least one floor plan, however, among the Ulm drawings that seems to share some of the same design DNA as the Basel drawings. But what stands out yet again in this comparison is the dry, abstracting character of the Basel sheets, in a manner very similar to the previously discussed floor plans that were ultimately derived from the London architectural sheet attributed to Albert Dürer. They take a step back from the active design process, and divorced from this context, they seem to take on another role. In his 1931 in-depth geometric analysis of the Basel Goldschmiederisse, Walter Überwasser characterized this quality as follows. Unter Weglassung aller Zutaten sucht der Ries näher auf die Metrik und Syntax des Stiles einzutreten. By stripping away all superficial ingredients, the drawing or drawings aim to address the metrics and syntax of the Gothic architectural vocabulary. At least one other contemporary graphic work of art is known that seems to have been made with exactly this ambition, and this project too seems to have been organized within the Ulm Minster Building Lodge. It concerns a series of 5 Gothic baldachins and their related floor plans that were engraved by the 15th century printmaker Wenzel van Olmutz. While van Olmutz positioned himself in the market as a talented reproduction artist, making copies in print after works by Martin Schongauer, the master of the housebook, Albert Dürer, and Stefan Lochner, amongst others, this series of architectural prints was long considered a work of his own design, largely based on the assumption that van Olmutz was a goldsmith by training. This is not entirely unwarranted, since other contemporary disciplinary crossovers survive. For instance, the so-called Fialenbüchlein, one of the first illustrated architectural treatises to be published in the Western world, was written, illustrated, and published in the late 1480s by the young Nuremberg goldsmith Hans Schuttemeyer. Inversely, in 2 prints published around 1484, the Netherlandish architect Allard Duhamel, who was then the principal supervisor of the building site of the Cathedral of St. John in Den Bosch, demonstrated his ability to also design at a far more delicate scale in an engraving of a monstrance and another of a baldachin, not unlike those of van Olmutz. Especially in the last quarter of the 15th and beginning of the 16th century, examples of these cross-disciplinary initiatives abounded. It is therefore not surprising that van Olmutz's authorship of the 5 baldachins and their related floor plans has not been questioned since the eminent print scholar Max Leers published them as part of the artist oeuvre in the late 19th century. The first to reconsider this assumption was the architectural historian Achim Timmerman. In 2002, he established that one of van Olmutz's 5 prints has served as the model for the crowning structure of a sacrament house that was executed between 1511 and 1514 in the German town of Nordlingen. According to Timmerman, the architect Stefan Weire had been able to realize the stone structure so effortlessly because of the meticulous nature of the print. And it was exactly the sophisticated level of architectural know-how communicated by the print, however, that caused Timmerman to wonder whether van Olmutz might, in this case, too, have had access to a model for his engraving. And while he could not identify this model at the time, we know now that the evidence to support his theory could be found not far away from Nordlingen, approximately 80 kilometers to the south in, you've guessed it, Ulm. Preserved among the drawings from the Ulm Minster archive, we find 2 proof impressions for one of Ulm's 5 prints. And as opposed to the finished print, of which we are lucky to have an impression at the Metropolitan Museum in New York, they consist of line engravings only. Furthermore, in the trial stages of the printing and collating, an error was made while adhering the floor plan to the elevation. The plan was first attached upside down, a mistake that was noted in the inscription below the print where someone wrote Das Oberteil, this is the top, so that the mistake could subsequently be corrected in the second proof. And I think this is an additional evidence that von Olmutz himself was not necessarily an architectural thinker and didn't know how the floor plan had to be mounted to the elevation. The survival of not one but two proof impressions of the same print in Ulm is also remarkable, and their related the relatively unscathed appearance, as opposed to the two other surviving proofs now in Vienna and Nuremberg, one a complete scrap and the other an elevation without its plan, added to the suspicion that the prints might relate directly to the activities of the building lodge of the Ulm Minster. In this respect, it is notable that in the Ulm archive itself, the connection to Wenzel von Ulm was not known at all. Instead, the design in the print was attributed to the architect Moritz Ensinger, who became Dombaumeister in Ulm in 1463. And on stylistic grounds, this attribution makes sense, as the execution of lines and decorative details compares closely to the surviving drawings by Ensinger himself. Further research revealed the extraordinary similarity between another one of von Olmutz's engravings and an elevation and floor plan of a Gothic baldachin known through a 19th century facsimile reproduced in Georg Müller's Denkmäler der Deutsche Baukunst. Now considered lost, the drawing that inspired the facsimile was attributed to the so-called Weingarten master, an otherwise unknown architect sometimes thought to be Moritz Ensinger himself, who was contracted in 1462 to provide the preliminary designs for the monumental sacrament house that was to be erected in the Ulm Minster. It took nearly 13 years to complete the 85-foot structure, which remains to this day the tallest sacrament house ever built, or one of the tallest sacrament houses ever built. The project clearly occupied the attention of the building lodge for some time, as at least 12 different designs by various artists, are associated with the project, though none forms its exact model. This implies that there were likely yet others, like the drawings attributed to Weingarten, that like the drawing attributed to Weingarten master, have since been lost. If at least two of von Olmutz's prints found their model in the circle of the architect Moritz von Ensinger in Ulm, it is highly likely that all five can be traced back to similar models. They are strikingly similar in their architectural vocabulary and presentation, which implies that the engravings are made during a coordinated campaign that involved a process of abstraction not unlike the Basler Goldschmiederisse. And this comes to the fore most clearly when we reconsider the comparison between von Olmutz's prints and Georg Müller's facsimile of its lost Ulm model. While the floor plans are identical, there's a striking difference between the depiction of the spires in the elevations. Whereas the spire in the facsimile ends in intertwined branches of so-called Ostwerk, the 15th century print of the same design shows a more generic resolution at top. This change was undoubtedly introduced on purpose because idiosyncratic details, such as the intertwined Ostwerk spire, could not be read from a floor plan. The design was therefore slightly adjusted, or in Überwasser's term, stripped of certain superficial ingredients to make it correspond directly to its floor plan and the vocabulary of the other four prints. In its educational ambition, von Olmutz's prints can be directly equated with its visually more simpler cousin from among the Basler Goldschmiederisse. There, 12 sets of drawings illustrate how changes in a floor plan affect the elevation of a baldachin fragment. Especially the 6 sets in the top row are highly instructive in this respect, since the floor plans are strikingly similar, but the designation of the support structure, here indicated with the little circles, completely changes the horizontal and vertical organization of the elevation. The sheet thus forms an eloquent synthesis of certain fundamental Gothic principles, and it is tempting to think that this sheet and many of the other pen and ink drawings in the Basler Goldschmiederisse group may also have been intended for a publication that was never realized. In the 1480s in particular, marked a crucial moment for Gothic architecture and printmaking. In 1484, Duhamel published his prints in Den Bosch, followed 2 years later by the illustrated architecture book by the architect Matthias Rohrixer in Regensburg. Hans Schmussemeyer published his previously mentioned Fialenbuchlein in Nuremberg shortly after, and somewhere in between, the so-called Master W of the Key was issuing numerous prints with architectural subject matter from his place of work in the southern Netherlands. While no such published version of the Basler Goldschmiederisse group exists, it seems apparent that their content was nevertheless accessible and was likely actively used as a teaching device that inspired the work of multiple generations of artists. And here are just some examples dating from before and after Schweiger's move to Basel, executed at a variety of places across the Upper Rhine region. Other 15th century drawings show that abstract line drawings were indeed actively used as teaching tools for the education of masons and training. On the left, we see a sheet of window tracery designs, now part of the collection of the Wallraf Museum in Cologne, and on the right, a sheet for geometric rib vaulting patterns from the vast collection of drawings related to the Stephanstone workshop in Vienna, now kept at the Akademie der Bildenden Künste. So who exactly put together a study collection of this nature in Ulm remains an open-ended question for the time being. Matthias Böblinger could be a likely candidate, but we cannot exclude the Zerlin family either. We know it was Jörg Zerlin the Younger who created the engraving after Böblinger's baptismal font at Langenau, and both he and his father were prolific designers of sculptural work in both wood and stone that often incorporated architectural elements that seamlessly spoke to the buildings they inhabited. Zerlin the Elder was so confident in his architectural abilities that he too submitted design proposals for both the Minster's West Tower and its monumental Sacrament House. And something like the architectural canopy of the Dreisitz, designed by Zerlin the Younger for Kloster Blaubeuren in 1493, the structure you see to the right, could be what is proposed in the previously cited London sheet attributed to Albert Dürer. And I must apologize for the quality of these photos, because it seems that the main altar in Blaubeuren is everything anyone ever wants to photograph. So the Dreisitz is always sort of tucked in the corner and never the focus of a good photo. But rather than remaining in the realm of speculation, it is time to round out our story by focusing on the missing link between Ulm and the collection of drawings that was taken to Basel by the goldsmith Jörg Schweiger. And for this, we turn to another artist whose work is abundantly present among the Basler Goldschmiederisse. That is the Augsburg goldsmith Jörg Zelt. While by no means a household name today, Zelt is considered one of the most famous and successful goldsmiths of his day. Born in the third quarter of the 15th century, his life and career overlapped with the golden age for the town of Augsburg that was marked, among others, by the success of the Fugger family and the reign of King and later Emperor Maximilian I. An established goldsmith by 1479, Zelt had numerous prestigious positions, fulfilled important commissions, and accumulated considerable wealth. Yet very few of the works that built his name survive today. Through archival records, we know that many of Zelt's own works were made from donated silver and gold, as well as older vessels that were considered redundant or in need of replacement. Many of his works met with a similar fate in later years. In addition, the final years of Zelt's life heralded a time of significant losses for artworks, especially those commissioned in a religious context. Norbert Lieb, Zelt's first biographer, rightfully stressed the disastrous effect of the religious turmoil of the Reformation on the survival of late medieval goldsmith work, including some of Zelt's own masterpieces. The silver altar for the Dome in Augsburg, a collaboration with the painter Hans Holbein the Elder, is perhaps the most famous example. In addition, however, from the mid-1480s onwards, Zelt received a steady stream of commissions from the Benedictine Church and Convent of Saints Ulrich and Afra. In 1496, he was even appointed as its official keeper of the treasury, which, as we can see from this Heiligtumsblatt created around that very time, consisted of a sizable collection of shrines, reliquaries, monstrances of architectural form, of which only a fraction survives today. And this is the second part of that Heiligtumsblatt. Dr. Ingrid Weber identified the reliquary in this 17th century illustration of the treasury as a since lost work by Zelt. She also inversely restituted a work to Zelt's oeuvre by identifying the monumental late Gothic monstrance now held in Tiefenbrunn as a masterpiece that must have been conceived in his workshop. And she did so in part by comparing the overall design and many of its highly sophisticated details with a drawing from among the Basler Goldschmiederisse, that in turn is a close copy after a drawing now kept in the Württembergisches Landesmuseum in Stuttgart and believed to be an original Visierung or design drawing by Zelt. There is no doubt that many of the other pen and ink drawings among the Basler Goldschmiederisse similarly follow other original designs by Zelt as well. This relationship is not surprising, since Jörg Schweiger is believed to have been Zelt's student and possible workshop assistant before he moved to Basel, where he established his workshop. So, Goldsmith's drawings after all, you must be thinking. Yes, but it's not quite that simple. This may become apparent when we add yet another work to the established lineup. In recent years, I was able to reconstruct this woodcut from two unique fragments, one held in the Universitätsbibliothek Erlangen and the other in the Stadtarchiv in Ulm. It shows a monstrance that is closely related to Zelt's other designs, but this time presented in a flat frontal elevation with its related floor plan. In short, it is a true architectural rendering of a piece of Goldsmith's work. The plot thickens when we add this woodcut of an altar design from the collection of the Albertina in Vienna. While it is there catalogued among the prints of the Master W of the Key, the medium of woodcut is extremely unusual for this artist, and the architectural vocabulary is clearly grounded in the South German school of the turn of the century. Beyond the strong stylistic coherence between the monstrance and the altar, the consistent presentation of the woodcuts leaves no doubt that they were made as part of the same campaign and spring from the mind of one and the same designer. That Zelt was an all-round designer is attested to through documentary evidence and various commissions. Especially during the first decade of the 16th century, in the years right before Jörg Schweiger's move to Basel, Zelt supplied the visierung for a number of architectural projects in and outside of Augsburg. In 1502, the Augsburg City Council requested from him designs for the Perlachsturm, which, while unexecuted, resulted in the oldest surviving architectural model north of the Alps, produced in Zelt's own workshop. Shortly thereafter, Zelt designed a stone sacrament house for the Church of St. Moritz in Augsburg. And during the same 1502-1503 campaign, to outfit the interiors of this church, the sculptors Adolf Dauche and Gregor Erhardt executed an altar after Zelt's design. In 1514, Zelt was again asked to design a sacrament house, this time for the Cathedral of Augsburg. And his design for this structure has recently been identified in the collection of the Germanisches Museum in Nuremberg. The elevation of this structure is accompanied by a separate sheet containing the related plans and sections. And comparisons with the master masons Hans Hammer's technical drawings for the pulpit in the Notre Dame in Strasbourg, or these plans after Lorenz Lechler's sacrament house in Esslingen, clearly demonstrate that Jörg Zelt was fully conversant in the highly intricate technical representational devices of late Gothic architecture. Moreover, comparisons between the sacrament house plans, the woodcuts, and some of the Basler Goldschmiederisse show a very consistent vocabulary of forms that get rearranged and reimagined with every new design. This is an example with floor plans alone, and here we see some elevations for altars and reliquaries. This kind of approach brings to mind the Ulm series by van Olmutz, whose mode of representation Zelt seems to have picked up on and consistently applied to his own work. While there are no direct ties to Ulm and Zelt's known biography, several of his close associates can be connected artistically to the Swabian city. This includes the previously mentioned Adolf Dauche and Gregor Erhardt, as well as Hans Holbein the Elder. Perhaps most important in this respect, however, is Burckhardt Engelberg, the Augsburg architect who took over the role of Ulm's Dombaumeister from Matthäus Biblinger in 1493. The two artists knew each other through their shared work on the Benedictine Church of St. Ulrichs in Afra in Augsburg, but had directly collaborated at least since 1489 when they worked together on the gilt copper crowning element of the south tower of the dome in Augsburg. In 1503, Engelberg would also make his Augsburg workshop available to Zelt for the execution of the stone sacrament house in the Church of St. Moritz, a gesture that seems to speak volumes about Engelberg's confidence in Zelt's abilities as an architectural designer. As far as we can trace, Zelt's architectural turn, if we can call it that, happened in the 1490s, thus coinciding with Engelberg's tenure in Ulm, and the question beckons what his exposure to the Ulm Minster's workshop archive might have been. And there's at least one work that suggests that Zelt may have executed a commission directly for the Ulminster at some point in the late 15th or early 16th century. And this concerns the partially gilt silver book covers now kept in the so-called Waddesdon bequest in the British Museum in London. Much is still unknown about the pair of luxury objects that carry the coat of arms of the Ulminster's Bauhütte. The commission is not recorded and the pieces are unmarked. But I think it is no coincidence that Johann Michael Fritz, in his Goldschmiedekunst der Gotik in Europa, opted to illustrate these works directly following the known commissions by Jörg Zelt. The book covers also display several characteristics that Ingrid Weber has associated with Zelt's working methods. This includes the purposeful mix of precious metals, combining gilt and silver elements even within single figures in a manner similar to the Tiefenbrunn monstrance, as well as the application of low relief engraving to decorate the otherwise plain silver substrate of the covers. The pattern of line engraving continues even behind the three-dimensional tracery where it is barely visible, which shows the dedication and finesse of a skilled master. Lastly, and this will not surprise you at this point, there are some striking parallels among the designs recorded in the Basler Goldschmiederisse. Most notably is the rosette at the center of the back cover. While the designs are not identical, they share a close familial relationship. The three-dimensional tracery also has close cousins among the Basler Goldschmiederisse. The motif of a pinnacle that splits in two like a pair of conjoined twins, for example, can be found in one of the reliquary designs, while the central crowning element with a double pinnacle and two side branches is represented among the more abstract tracery exercises. In conclusion, when Jörg Schweiger left Basel, he carried with him a valuable archive of design ideas that summarized the teachings and achievements of several generations of artists. His point of access had been his tutor, the Augsburg goldsmith turned homo universalis, Jörg Zelt. The latter seems to have gained access to a central body of drawings accessible possibly in the archive of the Ulminster workshop or that of an affiliated artist, from which he learned and subsequently added many of his own ideas and designs, proving himself in Burckhardt's works einem großen Erfinder, in whom goldsmith, woodcarver, and stonemason were united. In all likelihood, however, Zelt and Schweiger only represent one line of reception in an artistic diaspora that bore further fruit across various disciplines, but was ultimately cut short by the religious and stylistic riptides that swept across Europe over the following decades in the 16th century. We see this in the work of the Schweiger workshop itself, which certainly derived inspiration from the Gothic material for some of its designs, but increasingly veered in the direction of a more classicizing vocabulary. We undoubtedly owe the survival of the archive to the relatively short lifespan of the Schweiger family workshop in Basel. Had it continued for several more generations, there is no telling whether the Gothic drawings in particular would have survived. Had they not been part of the inventory of a goldsmith workshop, moreover, they would not have been subsumed into the Amerbach collection, which ultimately ensured their survival to the present day. So what is in a name? Arguably nothing and everything all at once. For the Basler Goldschmiederisse, it has meant safety and anonymity. Parked into a specific corner of art history, they waited for the gradual rediscovery of the full scope of their content. From Burckhardt's initial characterization as the very laboratory of Gothic invention, to Überwasser's analysis of their geometrical implications, to their current reintegration into a broader academic reassessment of Gothic architectural design as a highly sophisticated tradition rooted in draftsmanship that is yet to reveal all its secrets to us. Thank you.